honoring and supporting home and family as longtime sponsors of KATH 910 AM. We're Bob and Norma Duane, owners of My Mutual Mortgage of Grapevine. We would be honored to speak with you about all your mortgage needs. We can be reached at 817-527-3166. That's 817-527-3166. We are an equal housing lender, NMLS 265303.
Celebrating the culture of life. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul. Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth on the Guadalupe Radio Network in North Texas. Catholic radio for your soul. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone.
Welcome to The Quest from the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network, connecting you to Catholic priests live each weekday afternoon on the radio. Join us as we journey together on this pilgrimage of faith.
Hello there, and welcome to The Quest, a pilgrimage of faith here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. I'm Diana Varghese, filling in for Bailey Garland today. And gosh, it's such a joy to be back with you, and it's such a joy for us that you've chosen to be here with us on this journey of faith. And we have one of your Friday favorite priests with us, Monsignor Charles Pope. How are you, Monsignor? Welcome back.
Yes, I'm doing all right, and it's good to be back. I missed on Tuesday, yes.
Yes. Well, before we dive in, can you please start us off with a prayer for all of our listeners around the world today?
Yes. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We thank you, Lord, for another opportunity to speak about the faith. And our talk today will perhaps challenge us a bit because we're going to talk about martyrdom, different forms of martyrdom, and being willing to suffer for the gospel, suffer for the truth. So help us, Lord, because I know I'm not the only one. Most of us don't like suffering. But we ask you to attune our minds to the need that we can do it even with love if we know it's you. So we ask, Lord, for the grace to think and ponder martyrdom and our role in it. We thank you, Jesus, and pray in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Monsignor. You are going to be guiding us today through a huge aspect of our Christian faith, and that is persecution and martyrdom, as you've mentioned. You know, we have Christian brothers and sisters now all over the world, particularly in Nigeria, who are dying daily for their love of Christ. You know, and as you've mentioned, Monsignor, there's different kinds of martyrdom, something called white martyrdom that we're also going to get into. And there's just so many ways how Christians can feel persecuted, just showing up in our daily life. Have you felt persecuted for your faith, you know, at home, at work, at school? Do you feel ready if God were to call you to a certain kind of martyrdom? You know, be not afraid and live boldly for Christ. That is where we are going today. That's what we hope you take from the show today. And so as Nick on our sister show, Morning Joy, always says, we only have today, and we are live today. So this is your chance to live fully and dial in and get some answers to your questions. Share your stories with Monsignor Pope today. That number to call is 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. If you're on socials, thank you so much for being there with us. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, wherever you're streaming, just go ahead and drop your messages in the chats. Or you can always send us an email at thequest@grnonline.com. All right, Monsignor, so can you please just lay the foundation for us of Christian martyrdom and persecution, and then currently, you know, obviously everything that's going on in Nigeria, we want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, you know, Nigeria has come up in the news with President Donald Trump thinking he might even be willing to send some troops. I'm not so sure how I feel about that, but I can say that noting the seriousness of basically what amounts to Catholic-Muslim conflict. Now, there was some consternation probably a few weeks ago, a month ago, when one of I think it was Cardinal Parolin, and it could have been someone else, though, who sort of discounted the deaths in Nigeria, seemed to, by sort of suggesting that this is really more about farmers and herders, rather than Catholics and Muslims. I don't know, but the Catholics there are getting killed by Muslims is part of is the faith driving it, or is cattle ground versus farmland? I don't. I think it's not just going to be about farmland and stuff. So anyway, right now there's about 50,000 people who have died in the last 10 years. Every Sunday there's a church bombing or some kind of an attack, either with machetes or guns or other things, like I say, bombings. And almost every Sunday, if not every Sunday, there's a large number of people being killed. You go to Mass and you don't know if you're coming home. And so this, the kind of suffering that some people have for the faith, and I mean, I'm being I don't mean to sound like I'm a scold, but the air conditioning's not working, the heat's not on, and we're like that, and yet some people go to church on a Sunday and don't even know if they're coming home, but they go, and there's almost 90% of mass attendance in Nigeria. So again,
Wow.
there's something important to say here about how the courage and of their faith, and so on. So what I think I want to just extol that, but also say that martyrdom. If you want to go back, you asked a little bit about the history of it. Obviously, right from the very beginning, Jesus himself was martyred, shall we say, for the cause, and he has had many others join him for the sake of Christ. Now, we can talk in a minute by why the world hates us so, but generally speaking, the first 300-some years of the church were marked by great suffering. In fact, if you look at some statistics, of the first 33 popes, 30 died martyrs, 2 died in exile, and only 1 died in his bed. So, I mean, we can
My
hardly
goodness.
imagine suffering like that today. We priests and bishops, they're some of the most comforted men of all. we have staff and everything. It's and again, I see that it's not, martyrdom isn't something that we choose. It sort of chooses us. But I would also add, though, that again, just note the heroism of those early Christians. That I frankly think we get upset if somebody just raises an eyebrow at us. Well, I'm not going to get out there and talk about gay marriage being wrong because somebody might get upset, and or I might get, and we're like, wow, we're just so different in a way than they are. We're very settled into a kind of a leisurely Western culture, and yet even to this day, there are many, many people who are dying as martyrs. We know that in many Arab regions, this is a consistent problem. And you may recall 3 years ago in Egypt, there was the beheading of the martyrs there, and
Yes.
they were all told to deny Christ, refused to do so, and were beheaded on the spot. And it's just remarkable. You see, would we have that courage? I don't know. I hope I would. But it's like so many things. Sometimes these things are a little fuzzy. Okay, they're not exactly telling me to deny Christ, but they obviously don't like that I'm a Catholic. Well, I'll just sort of stop presenting myself that way, and so we kind of hide out. You'll call them the stealthy saints, the frozen chosen, the undercover Christians. But at the end of the day, we are. In America, anyway, are not that noted for our ability to suffer. And part of it, one last introductory note, we priests hardly prepare people for suffering, or let alone martyrdom. We have not prepared the church for the kind of suffering that we may be going into as this culture gets more and more secular. And that you're going to have to be willing to suffer for the truth. And that doesn't just mean some abstract thing. It's not going to be violins playing in the background while you go through a period of quick suffering. It's usually going to be, like losing your job, or being not denied a promotion, or, being attacked, or having your values, undermined by, government or school officials. And there's a lot of layers to martyrdom. And then standing up and saying, this shall not be, is going to cause you some suffering. But we have not prepared people. We unfortunately today preach what I think Dietrich Bonhoeffer called cheap grace. Cheap grace.
Those are some really great opening thoughts, Monsignor. And I just want to put it out there to all of our listeners, as you mentioned so many wonderful ways. I don't know if I would use the word wonderful, but, very real ways that we suffer in our daily life, especially now. I know many families are suffering just financially with the cost of so many things rising. There's so many ways that you might feel like you're suffering or being persecuted at work for your faith. Maybe you're afraid to speak up, or maybe you feel persecuted because you have a Jesus sticker on your car, and someone's honking the horn at you. Whatever it is, even in those little ways, we want to hear from you. Call us and let us know. Speak to Monsignor. Share your story with others. That number to call is 877-757-9424. 877-757-9424. You also mentioned, Monsignor, what's going on in Nigeria as Muslims are attacking the Christians or Catholics, over farmland or over the faith. We've seen this time and again. We know that living in the Middle East is one of the absolute dangerous places for Christians to live, and in Asia and in Africa. We know that Chaldean Catholics have suffered absolutely horrifying things in Iraq. And I don't think as a nation and as even the church here in America, we've given nearly enough attention to that and to them. I don't even hear it prayed in the prayers of the faithful, honestly. I've never even heard it brought up. And I just think it's terrible. So if there's any even Chaldean Catholics out there, I know that there are so many in San Diego and Detroit. They've fled to the United States for safety. We want to hear from you too. Share your experience. Maybe you have family member or friends. There's just so much here. So I know we're going into a break, Monsignor, but do you have any final thoughts before we head to the break?
We can be very provincial here in America. We know look at the news we look at, but we're so unaware. How about Sudan and other places? There's a terrible civil war. It's killed hundreds of thousands. And this is also a kind of a Catholic Muslim thing and so on. So enough said on all that, but as I say, we have to accept that there are many of our brothers and sisters that, they are suffering, and in a way that we can barely imagine.
Sure, absolutely. And we are with Monsignor Charles Pope today here on The Quest. We're looking forward to taking your call on anything you have to say about Christian persecution. 877-757-9424. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, Julie Carrick here. I am delighted to be the host of We Sing Our Faith. This weekly program shares beautiful Catholic music and deep insights of many Catholic teachings. Join me on Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Central Time for We Sing Our Faith here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Central Time. We Sing Our Faith.
Hi, I'm Debbie Georgiani, here with Adam Bly from the Spirit World.
Dreams can be mysterious. Often they are of natural origin, but sometimes they can connect us to the spiritual world in a real way.
So how can we tell the difference? Do we put too much emphasis on dreams instead of the teaching of the church?
Let's talk about it on our next show. Call in with your questions.
Listen to the Spirit World this Saturday at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, and subscribe to the Spirit World podcast.
Welcome back to The Quest, an extraordinary journey where every step brings us closer to discovering God's love for us. Want to join the conversation? Give us a call at 877-757-9424.
Welcome back to your afternoon drive show, The Quest, here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. We are with Monsignor Charles Pope today, and we're most grateful to be together on the airwaves with you. We are talking about Christian persecution and martyrdom today. We're taking your calls and questions. We are live. We're going to be going into white martyrdom, red martyrdom. We're going to be talking about using your sufferings, whatever they may be, as a means to become closer to Christ. There's so many people who live with chronic illness or live selflessly, caretaking for family members. All of the things that you in all of the ways that you suffer. Maybe you feel persecuted being Christian or Catholic in your workplace or in your school, and it's been a hostile environment for you. Give us a call and let us know. The number is 877-757-9424. Dial in at 877-757-9424, or you can send us an email at thequest@grnonline.com. So, Monsignor, just before we took that short break, we're just kind of diving in right to the martyrs and martyrdom that's going on right now all around the world. I know that so many are so nervous with the recently elected mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, his socialist beliefs, his Muslim beliefs. And how do you think Christians and Catholics in New York and beyond should be responding to this? Should they expect a greater persecution? Lots of people online are saying, we're getting out of New York. Is that the right response? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think it might be kind of politically correct to just say, well, we should never be concerned about this just because he's Muslim. And to some extent, that's true. But I also think we have to be sober to the effect that, in general, the Muslim people, as collectively understood, in most places where they live, are not particularly accustomed to assimilating into a culture, let alone being tolerant of other religions. Now, I'm not saying it happens nowhere, but I will simply say that it's rather difficult for Christians in largely Muslim countries. They face often stiff fines and other types of things that make their practice of the faith very difficult, and sometimes outright forbiddance and so on. So there's a range of things, but there are many differences between Catholics and Muslims in terms of this question of the use of violence and pressuring people to have faith, or particularly maybe more widely on the question of tolerating other faiths, traditions. And in the West, that's been one of our hallmarks, and warts and all, that's how we have handled it. But so I think there's some legitimate concerns. I don't want to overblow them or be unfair to the new mayor of New York simply on account of his Muslim faith. I think he's already got a lot of policies that are going to drive a lot of people away beyond that, like raising taxes even more, and so basically government control of lots of things. So I think that's going to drive more people away, more than the concerns for religious things. But again, 9/11 is still fresh in the minds of some of us who are older than 25. And he sees 9/11 very differently. He saw there was anti-Muslim hatred after it. We're trying to bury our dead, and they were Muslim terrorists. And so, as I say, we have to be careful, but I think we also have to have our guard up. This is a clash of cultures. So, without getting too frantic, I just think we have to be sober about the fact that in Europe right now, there are certain areas where the Muslims have become majority in that region, and they're beginning to set up Sharia law and different things that will crowd out Catholics and Christians in general. It could get much more difficult going ahead. And so I think this is just a very different tradition that the Muslims carry in terms of religious tolerance than we do. And we want them to be, they're going to be good partners in the world. And that's what we want, but that's not always what we get. And so enough said. I've gotten myself into enough trouble already. But there's a lot of pressure to always just say, no, they're all great people, and but they don't come from the same tradition that we do about some important things, and there's a clash. And so I think we have to see that this is part of the picture. And so I would say to those who are in New York, I don't know what to say to console you. I think there's bigger problems in the fact that he's a Muslim mayor. It's the policies that are going to be, someone said to me, what's the difference between socialism and communism? And the answer is about 5 years.
That's such a good point. And you make me think of something else, Monsignor. I was listening today to Father Chris Alar, also speaking on Christian martyrdom and persecution. And he, shared that the 20th century was the largest time of Christian persecution. It was under communism that was so huge.
Yeah.
And so it is something I think that we need to kind of wake up to, because we are very comfortable here in the United States.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, we certainly take religious liberty and stuff almost for granted. But in many parts of the world, that's just not true. And it hasn't been true forever. But we've come to expect it and see that it's a beautiful thing. But on the other hand, we have to accept the fact that not everybody feels the same way about that. And just because we want them to live in harmony doesn't mean they will. And so somewhere in here, we do have to accept the fact that we in the West are committing a kind of cultural suicide. We're not having children. There's a lot of hatred of our culture that's expressed within our cultures, anti-Americanism and so on, other things in Europe that sometimes go on. So meanwhile, the Muslims are very proud of who they are, and God bless them for that. And they have larger families, and I think at the end of the day, the more the Christian numbers diminish in Europe and the more the Muslim numbers, there's going to be a lot more conflict. There's going to be angry Europeans who are saying, you're turning this into a Muslim city. How dare you block the street on your prayer rugs? And, little irritating things like that, and greater things besides. You're now requiring all women to wear a scarf, and so on. These things are bound to come. And if they do, it's going to be involving some persecution, and it could lead to different types of martyrdom. Let's say white martyrdom, where there's a you might say you might lose your job, or you might lose access to things and that they're important to you. And then the red martyrdom of saying, well, if you don't comply, you'll be killed. And hopefully that's pretty far into the future, but it goes on. As I say, these killings of Nigerians and the war in Sudan and other places like that often are related to shifting of cultures and religion vis-a-vis Muslim and Catholic, or Muslim and Christian in general. It's just a fact. And it's going to lead to difficult days ahead in many parts of the world that haven't experienced this sort of persecution before.
Well, we got a comment, Monsignor, on YouTube from Lucre. Thank you for joining us there, Lucre. He says, we saw it here in the previous administration with the persecutions. And I would agree with that, too. I think people were more scared to stand up boldly with their Christian faith with the Biden administration and so on. What do you think about that, Monsignor?
Well, beyond the administration, it was just a lot of cancel culture. It was kind of a high watermark for the so-called woke left, which, we used to associate the left with, liberalism, freedom, get government out. And over the years, that kind of morphed into something just the opposite, where you can't say that, you can't do that, the government needs to pass a law, all these kinds of things. And a lot of things were being imposed, and that so-called cancel culture was an aspect of it. We see that certain comments were forbidden on Facebook and X, or we called it Twitter in those days, and these things were often by government policy. If you said something about COVID that wasn't doctrinaire, according to them, you were going to get canceled, maybe even fined. And these are the things that I think we have to all be aware of, that can affect us not just religiously, but even in terms of our general political structure.
And Monsignor, I think there would be a good time in the show, as we are just about 5 minutes away from the next short break, to kind of dive into white martyrdom, as I think here in the United States, that's what most people can relate to and most people experience. Can you dive into a little bit about that? To all of our listeners now joining us, we are with Monsignor Charles Pope. We're talking about Christian persecution and martyrdom throughout the world, here in the United States. How does that affect you and relate to you in your daily life living out your Christian faith? If you have any questions or stories, comments you want to share about this, or maybe you have some prayer requests, maybe you're going through some great sufferings in your life and you want to share with us some prayer requests, you can dial in now at 877 877-757-9424. Again, that's 877-757-9424. Right. So, Monsignor, what more can we explore with this idea of white martyrdom?
Well, I'll tell you a story about someone. This is going way back to the 1980s that I knew. He worked for IBM. Now, just working for IBM back in those days was like, you were in like Flynn. I mean, you put on the suit and you were proud you're going to stay with IBM the rest of your life. I mean, it was like you had made it. So anyway, this particular man was a member of something called the Mother of God community here in the sort of the northern suburbs of D.C. And the Mother of God community was kind of an intentional, somewhat charismatic community where they lived literally in continuity with each other. They kind of bought a couple of blocks of a new development, and they all moved in, and they formed community. And anyway, this guy's working for IBM, and all of a sudden he gets called in one day. He says, "We got great news for you." "Oh, really? What? We want to name you the head." The president of marketing on the West Coast. I mean, we're talking major thing here, major six figures and so on. Anyway, yes. He said to them, "Oh, yeah, let me think about that and pray about it." "We said, pray about it? What are you talking about?" "Well, I'd like to talk to my wife and family and see what they think." "Well, it's like we are IBM." And anyway, so he comes back on Monday and says, "I think I have to decline. You see, my kids and my family, we know the Lord, and, we're in a community that supports us in our faith, and I just can't give all that. Oh, come on, there's churches out on the West Coast. What's your problem? We are IBM. Mm-hmm. And finally, he had to say, "I just have to decline." Well, they didn't just accept that. They fired him. If IBM is not your whole life and your whole focus, and we're not priority number one, we can't use you.
That's
and
terrible.
So this is an example of someone who was just trying to really stay focused and practice his faith that got, he had to suffer the fact that he lost a big job opportunity, but the faith was more important. I could tell you another story about a particular woman that I knew who was head nurse at a major hospital. And then they started, "You got to start scrubbing in for abortions, and we're going to start teaching and offering." She said, "Oh, I can't cooperate with that." So she lost a big-time job as a head nurse at a very large, prominent hospital because she wouldn't agree to cooperate with abortion. And these are the kinds of things. I got 100 other stories, A pharmacist who was told, "You got to carry Plan B." He said, "I can't do that."
Goodness.
And he says, so as I say, we're going to decertify you, that kind of stuff. And I had to actually tell him something difficult, really. I did. I said, "You've got to probably say no. You can't. You're not going to do it. But I might lose my livelihood." I said, "Well, you can't sell that stuff." Anyway, I don't know what he finally decided, but I was understanding, but we had to be clear. You're cooperating in evil. You can't do
Well, I those stories are, just very powerful, Monsignor. Those very touching, very sad, very hard. What so many people have to go through in their workplace. I know there's listeners out there now who can relate to these stories. I absolutely know it. And we would love to hear from you. We are with Monsignor Charles Pope today here on The Quest, learning about Christian persecution and how to not be afraid of it, how to live your faith boldly. You could even feel persecuted in your own marriage with your spouse because maybe you're living the way of Christ now and your spouse does not want to catch up with you. Let us know. That number to call is 877-757-9424. Again, 877-757-9424. Stay with us. We're going to be right back after this short break.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. On Thursday, thousands came to Lansing, Michigan for the second Michigan March for Life. 5 Catholic bishops and other Christian leaders took part as marchers made public their concern for women's safety as Michigan law has removed medical protections from abortion. Right to Life of Michigan announced at the march that it is helping connect Michigan women in need with nearly 100 pregnancy resource centers. Bishop Thomas Perprocki is pleading with his flock and others to seek a governor's veto of assisted suicide legislation in Illinois. State senators inserted suicide into an unrelated food sanitation bill last Friday. Pro-life leaders say legal arranged dying is not compassion, but coercion, abuse, and abandonment of vulnerable persons. This is Life News Radio.
The view, the accurate view of the human person, changes everything. The news you hear and see pertaining to the human person has the power to inform or misinform your opinions and what you do with the gift of life and what you allow your government to do. It's why we at this station offer news on the life issue. We hope you carefully assess what you hear, read, and view.
Florida AG James Uthmeyer says Planned Parenthood has violated the State Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act. A state suit alleges deceptive marketing and false claims of safety in the use of abortion pills that omits critical information about adverse events. And in a CNN interview Monday, San Francisco's Nancy Pelosi says she is leaving Congress after this session. Others in California have long shown interest in replacing the 85-year-old matriarch of abortion advocacy on Capitol Hill. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
You're listening to The Quest, a pilgrimage of faith. Have a question or something to share? Call the show live at 877-757-9424.
Hello there, and welcome back to The Quest here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. We are with Monsignor Charles Pope today, and we have been having a very fruitful conversation about Christian persecution and the different kinds of martyrdom that we all face as Christians throughout the world. So if you have any questions or stories at all about this aspect of our faith, call in now and our call screener, Dennis, will get you on with us. We invite you to dial in and be bold and use your voice for Christ today at 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. You can also drop a message on socials, as Luke Cray did earlier in the show, or you can email us at thequest@grnonline.com. Monsignor, I have another kind of aspect to persecutions that I would like to bring up with you. You know, one could easily say there are major persecutions against children simply because they are children. You know, we have abortions, we have child trafficking, we have child slavery. We bombard children with ludicrous ideologies. You know, we persecute children at Catholic school mass, as that happened here in the United States, at Christian schools, at public schools. You know, what is this fixation that our society has on the persecution of our children?
Yeah, I think the best sentiment is that we all know that investing in our children is going to have a big effect on our future as a country, as well as individuals. And so you're going to find those who are good as well as those who are wicked are going to tend to target children, especially the Marxist approach to get hold of the children, let the state largely raise them, rather than the parents. And so we start to see lots of intrusive government things through the public schools all throughout the world, and then also in our own country. Now, and again, it's finally gotten so bad that many Catholics and Christians have got their kids out of those systems, and I have them either in Catholic school or homeschooling. But it's a terrible thing. They're being targeted with ideologies, and of course the horrible stuff you're talking about of sexual trafficking, other types of trafficking. There's all kinds of ways, but of course, obviously, a child in the womb is in a pretty vulnerable place. It's a pretty dangerous place in our culture. Shouldn't be. Should be the safest place. But they can easily be killed just because of decisions that other people make. So these is kind of a quiet, almost hidden martyrdom. Now, by the way, let's maybe get back to the word martyr, which of course, martyrios means witness. So we want to some extent, we would limit the question of martyrdom to those who were killed because they witnessed to the faith in some way. Yeah, we stretched that a little bit. For example, the holy innocents who were martyred when 2 years and under Herod during Jesus' infancy. They weren't technically killed for Christ because he wasn't known yet, but they were because Herod was trying to kill whoever this newborn king of the Jews and have him killed, and he lashed out and swing and a miss, so to speak. Jesus escaped, but many of these young boys didn't, and so they're called martyrs, even though technically they didn't announce Jesus; they were too young. But again, you start to see that, generally speaking, we speak of martyrdom as assigned to those people for whom or because of their faith. That they are persecuted and or have its sufferings inflicted upon them. Okay, so but on the other hand, all of us are called to suffering in general. It isn't only just martyrdom that makes us suffer. Sometimes we're just suffering in a world that's kind of gone mad. A lot of Catholics today feel pretty beat up and pretty frustrated with the situation, not only in our culture but also in the church, even to the highest levels. There's lots of what is going on? And being a lot of people who love the traditional Latin Mass are being just unreasonably isolated. All that talk, totus, 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 well or welcome, unless, you're a Latin Mass Catholic. If that's the case, get out of our parishes and go somewhere else. And so all of a sudden, we're not reaching out to the marginalized, we're marginalizing the mainstreams. And so there's a lot of frustration, a lot of suffering that goes with it. There's a good book out by Father Donald Haggerty on this question of the hour of testing, it's called, and how to make it through a church that's in division and decline. And he takes us through Christ's passion, all the things that Jesus suffered, not just from the pagan Romans, but from his own fellow Jews and even his own apostles and others who abandoned him. There were only 5 people at the foot of the cross, only one of them a bishop. Judas betrayed him, Peter denied him, the others all beat it and got out, except for John. And Christ suffered mightily. And he makes the point in this book that if we were going to follow Jesus Christ, we have to see that these things are unfolding now also in the church, that today we who seek to be faithful are often going to be hated not just by the obvious candidates, but even by bishops and priests and popes. And it is shocking. And it's a really acute form of suffering because, the very ones you want to sort of support you are the ones who are attacking you. And it isn't for coming up with some new radical heresy. It's for the opposite, that you're not going along with some of the crazy stuff that's being proposed. So it's a time of great suffering, and some suffer directly on account of Christ, some for his teachings, and these are technically all martyrs. They're witnessing to the faith and therefore are being hated and persecuted, as Jesus promised we would if we do that.
Those are excellent points there and things to think about. And as you were speaking, Monsignor, had the thought about vocations booming through times of martyrdom. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, we get so many wonderful vocations from Africa. I know there's wonderful African priests. They have the most lively faith. They have seen probably the worst of things that we can't even imagine. And do you have any connection that you can make for all of us as to why that is? And how can we take our sufferings here in the United States and make it so that we can live our faith more boldly?
Well, there's the old expression, the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. This blood produces fruitfulness. You would think that, I'm sure the role of martyring people, killing them, is to strike fear in the hearts of the faithful so that they hide or stop practicing the faith. And I think that's probably, for some people, that's what happens. But for others, they're emboldened. And we almost always find this, that when there is a persecution that breaks out in some part of the church, it begins to bear great fruits. And it's mysterious, but it's also, it goes back to the theology of the cross, wherein the cross is not a tree of death, it's a tree of life. And Christ brings us life, paradoxically, through his death. And so this is borne out throughout history. So we see that also here in this country where, again, some of the most persecuted people are inside the church are those who try to practice the faith with clarity, who like the traditions and so on. And most of the vocations to the priesthood are coming from much more the ranks of Catholics like that. But part of it is that they're suffering, and it produces vocations. I'll tell you my own story. There was a certain sense I had when back in the 80s, the early 80s, the church was in pretty bad shape then too. But we didn't even have stuff we'd have now, like the internet or other groups or publications and things. It was kind of like, well, you just kind of, the voice of craziness was everywhere, and there wasn't really an active voice pushing back. There wasn't even a catechism, and the canon law hadn't even been produced yet for the new canon law. So it was Wild West time. And I thought to myself, my father thought I was crazy. Why do you want to join the church? I mean, to be a priest. Sure. And I said, well, I don't know. But Charlie, the whole thing's in meltdown. They're all, he said, I said, well, Dad, I think I can make a difference. I was actually emboldened by that. I wanted to get in the church and make a difference. I was tired of all the pablum and, crazy stuff that was being taught, just dumb things, butterfly theology and all kinds of crazy nonsense. And I wanted to get in there and make a difference. And I think I have tried, but the point is that it's often the case that even when you would think all of this would discourage things like vocations or the practice of the faith, it often has the exact opposite effect, because people want to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's such a beautiful testimony, Monsignor. I'm so glad I finally got to hear it. I've always wanted to ask you a little bit about your vocation story. I'm glad you gave us a glimpse there. Mm-hmm. So to all of our listeners out there, we're with Monsignor Charles Pope today discussing Christian persecution, and now discussing how can that make you feel more bold to live out your faith, as it did for Monsignor when he was a young man. He wanted to make a difference in the world. Do you feel like any form of persecution you have experienced, maybe in your own family or amongst your friends, for living the Christian faith, has it emboldened you? We would love to hear about it. The number to call is 877-757-9424. Again, that's 877-757-9424. You can always send us an email at thequest@grnonline.com, or continue to drop your messages on socials. We'd love to hear from you there, and we'll love to get you in the show that way. Monsignor, that's such a great point you brought up about being emboldened. What other ways, maybe I should phrase it this way, what virtues should we look to grow in to not be afraid and to be emboldened to live our Christian faith, how God is calling us to, even amongst persecutions, red martyrdom or white martyrdom, whatever it may be? What virtues should we look to grow in our faith?
Yeah, well, certainly zeal and joy, and also fortitude are key. Fortitude is sometimes mistaken for just the word courage, but there's much more to fortitude. Very often, fortitude is more related to things like patience and long-suffering, when staying the course when it doesn't seem like you're making a lot of progress, and not giving up easily. It's about thinking great thoughts and doing great things, there's magnificence, and there's the idea of those are the great thoughts, and then there's being magnanimous. That's thinking great thoughts, and then being magnificent is doing great things. So thinking and doing great things, a certain boldness, but fortitude, like any virtue, is in the middle. It stands between being foolhardy and presumptuous versus being, just scared and lazy. So fortitude is that middle ground where you fight the good fight. You find a good fight and you get in it. You take some risk. You're bold. You're courageous, but you're not foolish and reckless either. And so it's always all the virtues is governed by prudence, and of course then joy and zeal. I mean, joy is like a real motivator. I mean, it's amazing. And people, joy is, as Mother Teresa says, that joy is like a net that you catch souls with.
Oh, I love that
know,
quote so much. Yeah.
Yeah. It's joyful orthodoxy. It's not just, being grumpy. I have a tendency to be a little curmudgeonly, but I try to temper it with a little bit of joy and humor. Because, it's an important thing to be joyfully aware of what the Lord teaches and is offering, and to be joyful about that. So these are some of the virtues we certainly want to grow in, because it's going to, there are things that can bring us down and make us sad. And, you have to get, gratitude in there. You've got to have joy. But above all, you need, I think, fortitude, which is, again, not just about being courageous. It's about finding that proper way forward, even in spite of complications or difficulties or resistance. It's more about perseverance, really, than just raw courage.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Monsignor. We have so much to learn still on the other side of the break. Don't go. We are going to keep discussing all of these things. Call us at 877-757-9424.
This is Franciscan Media's Saint of the Day for November 7th. Today we celebrate Saint Didacus. How many of us could be accused of being so generous with the poor that friends express concern about the depth of our charity? Most of us would probably be found innocent of such a charge if it were ever leveled against us. But today's saint didn't get off so easily. Didacus, or Diego, was born in Spain in 1400 and spent some time living as a hermit. After becoming a Franciscan brother, he developed a reputation for his heroic penances and legendary generosity toward the poor. He volunteered for the missions in the Canary Islands and worked there with great energy and success. In 1450, Didacus was sent to Rome to attend the canonization of St. Bernardine of Siena, a fellow Franciscan. Many of the friars attending the event became sick, and Didacus stayed for several months to nurse them back to health. Returning to Spain, Didacus pursued a life of contemplation full-time before his death in 1463. At his canonization in 1588, Didacus was praised for the holiness of his life and for his example. There's more about the saints along with inspiration and Catholic resources at our website, saintoftheday.org. From Franciscan Media, this has been Saint of the Day.
This is The Quest from the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network. Share the show with a friend. You can find us on social media. Want to listen again? We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, the free Guadalupe Radio Network app, or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts.
Welcome back to our final segment of today's show, The Quest, here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. We have truly had a great and eye-opening conversation with Monsignor Pope today on Christian martyrdom, Christian persecution, all of the ways we face Christian persecution in the United States and throughout the whole world. So if you have any questions on any of the things that we have covered today, we've really touched on it all between the red martyrdom, white martyrdom, maybe sufferings in your life that you feel persecuted just for being a Christian. It could be in your own family. It could be amongst your friends. We discussed the election of the New York mayor. How do you feel about that? And what do you think about it? We're now discussing all of the virtues that it takes to live our faith boldly. So if you have any questions, stories you want to share, last chance to dial in now. We will get you in at 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. So Monsignor, you were sharing all of these wonderful virtues that really brought me joy to kind of lift up the conversation a little bit. We're talking about joy and gratitude and fortitude, all of the things that so many saints before us have lived out beautifully. So kind of talking about that, what are some of the saints, or who and what are some of the saints and martyrs that we can look to? You know, I know a major one is Saint Maximilian Kolbe, and there's that wonderful movie Triumph of the Heart that people can go and watch and get some inspiration from his life. So who else do you recommend that we can turn to?
Well, I think you're right. Maximilian Kolbe's is an important one because of his ability to combine martyrdom with charity, and that's powerful when you think about it. And so, with that in mind, I guess the first thing, I would want to turn to some of the early Christians in particular, and the one I think we actually have the most information about is Paul. We know what he was thinking as his death approached, and he had a pretty powerful, tell me, I've fought the good fight, I've run the race, I don't know what awaits me, but I know this, a crown of righteousness awaits. And so he speaks a lot about just the power of being prepared to die for Christ. Another great saint from the early church who has a long testimony about martyrdom is Ignatius of Antioch, and he wrote this series of letters basically saying, I'm going to be ground by the teeth of lions, and they will be my burial chamber, and all of these sorts of things. Don't save me, I need to go and do this for Christ. If I look like I'm getting scared, don't try to save me. I mean, he has, but he just, all I want to do is die for Christ. And you're like, where do you get this? I think of Priscilla and Aquila. I'm sorry, not. I think of oh,
is it
gosh,
Cecilia?
Now I draw a blank. Huh?
Cecilia?
Yeah,
is that who you're going to mention?
Yeah, they couldn't. But there was also the two North African martyrs. Oh, gosh, suddenly drawing a blank. Anyway, she was out on the field there, and she was just a young girl, and she Perpetua, Perpetua. Yeah, so she was being about to be killed by the soldier, but he just couldn't take it to kill a young woman. And she literally guided the sword to her neck and said, do what you need to do. You send me home to my Lord. I think of others like Lucy, who had her eyes gouged out, or Agatha had her breast cut off. I mean,
yes.
We just can't imagine that kind of suffering. Mm-hmm. There were so many who were just taken by the Nero and others and just used as covered with pitch and set on fire and used to light up parties up on poles.
Oh my gosh!
My gosh, just the things they went through, and beheadings and things. We've become kind of dainty as a culture. Beheadings are grotesque and awful, just horrifying. Yes. I mean, all of these are things that we just hardly think of, and I can just say that again. Somewhere you had the beautiful example of Paul of the Cross, and also in Uganda, Charles Lwanga, and so on, and his companions, and how they were persecuted for basically avoiding illicit sexual union and stuff like this. The king had them killed, crucified and killed, and so many of these martyrs from all over the world. And their stories are still with us in the martyrology. Some of the stories may be a little fanciful, but basically, again, a very, very profound testimony. And maybe just kind of getting back to a little scolding for ourselves, I mean, not only can we hardly imagine it, but we probably make a lot of excuses. Well, I can't say, it's okay, and I can put a little incense on this other altar if I need to. And, there was a great controversy in the early church when the persecutions finally lifted, and how to handle these people who didn't engage in martyrdom or get thrown in jail, but they did burn altar at the incense of the Caesar. And there was a big fight in the church about how to receive them back, or should we receive them back at all. They had committed the worst sin of all, apostasy. And they did it in weakness. And finally, the church prevailed with Cornelius, and Cyprian had debates. And Cornelius, it basically, again, let's show them mercy. Let's have them, undertake penance and be restored to Christ. Because that's what Jesus does. But it was a tough time. Some people had been mangled and mutilated, and they were really angry, frankly, that some of these other Christians just got off, and now they're back in. No questions asked, and all that kind of stuff, So it's always, these things are always in the church.
Yeah, it's a fantastic reminder to us to focus on all of the amazing gifts that we do have right now in the United States in our lifetime. The safety, we can just go on a walk, excuse me, go to mass. Excuse me. Yeah, we do have a question, Monsignor, from our call screener, Dennis. I have been told that a martyr. I'm so sorry, Monsignor. Excuse me. You might want to continue with the saints
Get you
there.
some water there.
No worries, Father. Monsignor, I got you. I've been told that a martyr that dies in the state of grace bypasses purgatory. If someone dies a martyr's death, should masses still be offered?
Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know that that's a definitive teaching of the church. I think it's a tradition that martyrs go straight to heaven. And I wouldn't completely doubt it there, but I do know that it's not a dogma or a doctrine. It's kind of a tradition, a common opinion. So I would, just to be safe, I would still have masses offered for them, even if, just like we do for the saints, they're in heaven. They don't need our masses, but we remember them. And so that would be, I guess, the best answer I could come up with there. So.
Well, thank you, Dennis, for your question and for your wonderful work that you do for GRN as our call screener. You're awesome. Thank you for that answer, Monsignor. Is there anything else, Monsignor? We just have 2 minutes left of the show that you would like to add to wrap up the conversation and before you say a prayer for us.
Martyrdom is a very fearsome thing, but it's a beautiful, life-giving thing. The blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. And while we can roll our eyes and be horrified by how some of our brethren have been treated or are being treated, we should also realize the glory that waits for them and the fruits that they bear for the church, and have great, great honor to all the martyrs.
Well, thank you. And thank you to Joe, our producer, for stepping in for me there so seamlessly. I really appreciate you. Mm-hmm. That was a little bug in my throat there, so thank you. Well, Monsignor, we had a really wonderful show today. Can you please close us in a prayer?
Yes, Lord, we are so grateful for the example of the martyrs, for the fruit they bore. When we say the creed every Sunday, we forget that many people died for that creed. And when we rush through it and think, we have to say the long one again, So help us, Lord, to be less annoyed by these things and remember the glory that is behind our faith. And starting with your own glorious, glorious death and resurrection for us, Lord. So help us, Lord, save us, have mercy upon us, and keep us always in your grace, and commemorating our most holy, most pure, most blessed and glorious Lady Theotokos and ever Virgin Mary. We commend ourselves and each other and all our lives unto Christ our God. Amen.
Amen. Tomorrow morning, catch the Spirit World with Debbie and Adam at 10 a.m. Central. They're going to be talking all about Marian titles, dogmas, and the new document out by the Vatican. Also, We Sing Our Faith is live tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Central. They will be taking calls. You don't want to miss it, so call in and speak with Julie Carrick. Thank you so much to all of our listeners today. Thank you to the entire show team at GRN for making this all possible. I'm Diana Varghese, filling in for Bailey Garland. May you all be blessed this weekend.